welcome everyone. And I had a wonderful experience last week. I was telling everybody about the class and the feedback and how could it possibly work on Zoom when I haven't met most people. I see a couple of old friends here, longtime friends, and it worked. And it worked because of the feedback and the participation and the questions that you asked. So again, please feel free to add your questions to the chat box. And of course, if we've got some time, we can do some overall questions at the end. Today is part 2 of session out of 3 sessions, and we are looking at not tradition, but transition. And we're going to be taking a look at how biblical leadership transitions, specifically from the book of Numbers, really didn't just happen then once and for all, but they kind of echo through our own lives. And for me, I like to try to look at Tanakh, at Bible, not so much as the literal word, but something that we can take seriously because we can reflect on it and learn something about our lives and our stories and the threads that connect us to the past. So with that, we're going to start with a little bit of a lighthearted video. We're going to be talking today, just to set this up, about Moses striking the rock and how the Jewish people, they're called mitlonanim in the Bible. They are called complainers. I know somebody last week didn't like the fact so much that I talked about the Jewish people complaining, and then I realized, you know what? I didn't call them that. The Tanakh called them that. They are called mitlonanim. So with that, let's take a look at what I hope will be a somewhat humorous video to get us started. This is on Moses
in such a way
striking the rock.
Under my ingrown toenail.
You're gonna have to amputate your leg.
And somehow,
What?
I think my laryngitis is coming back.
Hey.
Man, sweating like I just built 7 pyramids.
We're all gonna get sunstroke and burn to death.
You parched?
Oh, my parched.
My throat is parched.
Yeah. Moses!
We're thirsty here.
I'd rather be a slave than die of thirst.
Could you use a coffee?
Oh, can I use a coffee?
Next time you take the Jews out of Egypt, remember to pack the drinks. Would you guys stop embellishing for 1 minute?
I think he's mad.
So I split the seed for you. You get hungry. I give you manna. Now you guys are thirsty. Oh, my throat is parched. You thirsty? Here.
What? No cups?
You gotta be kidding me.
Okay, so if you couldn't quite see or hear it, after striking the rock and the water gushing out, of course, one of the Israelites said, what, no cup? So, you know, we can understand maybe why Moshe found his patience tried at times, right? You would think, and this is a recurring theme, that the Israelite people, Bnei Israel, who experienced the greatest biblical miracle of all, of walking through what? Walking through water, would not complain of all things about water. And yet, although they experienced this miracle at the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, throughout their wandering, one of the main complaints that they have is the lack of water. Now, look, this is no laughing matter. Water sustenance, I mean, it doesn't get more basic. A lot of people predict that some of the next major battles, God forbid, in the Middle East will not be fought over fossil fuels, but they'll be fought over water, because water is a serious matter. And yet you would still think, wouldn't you, that if you were able to walk through on dry land and see water, a wall of water on the right and the left, that you might complain about the food, the variety of the food, maybe the heat, but water, really? And yet we see this happen time and time and again. And in fact, in what we'll be studying, we see that water really becomes the sort of object through which Moshe seems to lose his own way and his ability to actually enter the land with the people. So we're going to take a look at a source sheet that I've prepared. And I will just share my screen a moment in case you don't have it. And Julie, do you think that maybe we could look at the part at the beginning where I was singing a little bit? I forgot to warm up, as if that would have made a difference, but that would be nice. The reasons I'm a rabbi and not a cantor. All right, so let's get started. Last week we spoke briefly about the theme of betrayal in the book of Numbers, and we said that Moses was attacked and felt betrayed by his family, by Aaron and Miriam, with whom he was typically very, very close. His cousins, the Jewish people, the leaders, everything just seemed to be falling apart. But typically, we find in the Tanakh, in the Bible, that Moses was incredibly close with his big sister and his big brother, with Miriam and with Aaron. Tragically, without warning, we read that the Israelites arrived at a certain location. They were in the Midbar Tzin, the wilderness of Tzin, and we're just told without any elaboration, Vatamot Sham Miriam, that Miriam died and she was buried there. There is a beautiful tradition, and just a lovely tradition, that Miriam was associated with a well of water. And Miriam was really the inspiration for God making sure that the Jewish people had water, because she was that nurturing figure, right? She drew Moshe out of the water, right? Through her leadership as well, she helped to sustain the people. She was a leader in her own right. And we're told that she passed away. We're not told how, and we're not told why, which is the perfect opening for a midrash, a rabbinic interpretation, to step in and provide a little bit of detail. So what we're told is that Miriam died by a kiss of God. It was a very gentle and a very sweet death. Now, a midrash has to be based on some biblical ambiguity or unusual word. How do the rabbis possibly deduce that she died by a divine kiss, by a nishika? Well, the rabbis actually learn this from a comparable statement about Moshe. And we're told that Moses also died by a kiss of God. And not only that, but Aaron died by a kiss of God. Because if it happened to Moses, and all three, that is Aaron, Miriam, and Moses, were equal in prophetic stature, which they were according to tradition, then if one of them died by a kiss of death, then all of them obviously died by a kiss of death. However, according to the rabbis, we're not told that it was by a kiss of death. Why? Because it was deemed to be, and again, we're not going to compare our values with ancient values, but back in the day, it would have been disrespectful to talk about a woman dying by a kiss. Now, somehow it's not disrespectful to talk about like a man dying by a kiss of God. We're not going to go in that direction. But be that as it may, the rabbis just wanted to show that Miriam died a gentle death, a loving death, and they wanted to remind people that her leadership stature was equal to that of Moses, who also died by a kiss of death. Now, you may be asking, how do we know that Moses died by a kiss of death?
Rabbi Chaim, I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 second. Sorry, could you zoom in on the text, like expand the number
Did you
there
say?
so it's a little
Did you
bigger?
say expound on it?
A little more technical than that. Great, amazing, thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. That's good. So now, how do we know that Moses died by a kiss of death? I love this. You think your rabbi, for those of you who have a rabbi, who have had a rabbi, you think that they're terrible punsters? You have to understand it. We come by it honestly, because even the ancient rabbinic rabbis who produced things like the Siddur and the Haggadah, they loved verbal wordplay. So we read in Deuteronomy, it says that Moshe died, Vayamat Sham Moshe, al pi Hashem, which literally means according to God's word, but they interpret al pi as al peh, by the mouth of God, meaning that Moshe's death was again with a kiss of God. And let me unshare for a moment and ask you, what do you think the rabbis are trying to get at when they say that all three of these siblings died by a kiss of God? What does that convey to you? What does it mean to you? And please put your answer in the chat box. Breath of life. Well, that's good. The breath of life, tenderness. Can you zoom in on the text? Oh, sorry, that was earlier. A specialness. Yes. Natural causes. Dying of a natural causes in a kiss. I'm not quite sure if somebody would like to elaborate on that. Okay, right. This was, clearly a kind of special family, and I want to say privilege, painless. I love that. Isn't that what we all aspire to today? Nothing visible, and there's something to suggest in the text that we don't read anything about the decay of their bodies at all. Equality, okay. The word of God. Okay. I like that one, actually. I mean, it does literally mean according to the word of God, but the kiss can be symbolic of a command of God. Well, yes, and God indicated to them that it was time to die, and they made themselves ready. We're going to actually look at that later today. Okay, loving. All right. So I think we got the general consensus that it means the family was special, that they merited a special death. It was painless. It was gentle and caring, and also there was a part of acceptance on the part of these three siblings as well. Okay, we're going to come back to the theme later of why it was important to stress a gentle death. So let's bracket that, but please, if I forget it, please do come back and ask about that again. Okay, let's see if I can remember to share where we were. And, okay. The text is looking good in terms of the size of the font. Okay, very good. All right, now we're going to see striking the rock, Act 1, striking the rock, Act 2. Now, the context again, for the first time when Moshe struck the rock, because we have two incidents in the Bible of when Moshe is commanded by God to bring forth water from a rock. The first time, God explicitly says, all right, Moshe, take your rod. Remember that rod that you used so successfully against Pharaoh, you know, it turned into a snake, and, you know, you were able to use it to work a little magic to try to persuade Pharaoh to let the people go. We need that rod again. And this time it will as a sign for the Israelites of my power. Just give the rock a whack and the water will come gushing forth. So again, we have the Israelites. This becomes sort of a trope, of a refrain of Israelite complaint. Moshe paralyzed at times, uncertain about how to behave, because as we said last week, he was a very humble man. You know, this is not a position that he signed up for. And I'm not sure that after he was given it, he would have signed up for it. But that's his role, and he accepts it. When it comes to conflict, however, he's not afraid to confront Pharaoh, at least once he gets over his initial fears. But when his own family attacks him, that is the broader Jewish people, he honestly gets stuck most of the time. So the people grumble about water right away. And this is, by the way, this is right after they walk through the Sea of Reeds. The first complaint that they have is about water after they just had a miracle by the water. So God says to them, if you take a look, in verse 5, right? Take some of the elders, take that rod, that staff, I'll be standing before you, and strike the rock, and water will issue from it, right? And in the Hebrew, hineni omed lefanecha, sham alatzor b'chorev v'hikita batzor, right? It's very important. Strike the rock, and water will come flowing from it. What we don't have in here is the what no cup. That was actually just ad-libbed in the earlier video, but the promise of the water was there. Now, what happens years later? Now, we need more context. Literally, it appears that Miriam has just died. Remember, we read this earlier, this first sentence? And the community is once again without water, and they confront Moshe and Aharon. Now, think about what it must have been like for Moshe. His sister has died. She has been the steady guiding presence throughout his lifetime. Often behind the scenes, but clearly someone that he was grateful for and generally worked well with, cooperated with, loved each other their entire lives. She's just died. And before perhaps Moshe has a chance to even grieve, or at least there's no mention of giving him a break, the people attack Moshe again, Vayarev ha'am im Moshe, and they're still saying, Lu gavanu. Oh, if we had only perished, we would have been so much better off. They are thirsty. If you look down toward the end of verse 5. They said, Umayim ayin lishtot. Right? We have 0 water, not even a drop. Now, I didn't count the number of times that the people had complained about the lack of water and the number of times that their wish had been fulfilled. And by the way, whenever the people grumbled, there was water, okay? It appeared, which means it would have been there anyway if they hadn't grumbled, because God didn't bring them out from the land of Egypt to die of either starvation or to die of thirst. So here's Moshe. I'm thinking that he's probably in mourning along with Aaron. The people are now attacking him like no faith after all this time. And God says to Moshe, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, God said to Moshe, Kach et hamateh, remember that staff that you have, that rod? Well, we're going to bring it out of retirement again, because we need it. Now, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. What would you think? What would you expect to follow? Forget what you know if you're familiar with this text, but please put in the chat box. What would you expect to follow if the people are complaining about the water and God said, Moshe, take the rock? What should come next? Please put your answer in the chat box. Okay. All right, hit the rock. Strike the rock. Yeah. I mean, you know the playbook. Yes, and the connection again was between the absence of water and Miriam's death was, according to another rabbinic teaching, Miriam, who was associated with the well, when she passed away, the well disappeared. So I'm sorry that I didn't make that explicit. That's why at that moment, as we studied last week, you have to read before and after. The rabbis like to see this smichut parshiot, this juxtaposition of different chapters of the Bible. What does one have to teach the other? How can one shed light? All right. This is the next generation, so they were not around. Epigenetics, that's cute. Yeah, well, there is something about generational transmission and the traits that we have. If we have them, we are likely to transmit them in one form or another to those who come after us, right? That's why we see certain traits recurring in families generation after generation. Okay, so we know the playbook. The people complain. God tells Moshe, take the staff. And then, now let's look at what happens again. I love this here because it feels like a kind of sleight of hand act where you're looking for one thing, but something else happens just at the moment when you're kind of distracted looking for the other. All right, so take the staff. You and Aaron assemble the people. Boy, sure sounds familiar. You will give water to the people, right? And what is different here? Vidibartem el hasela. Don't strike it. Speak to the rock. Now, if you think that last miracle back in Exodus was pretty cool, striking the rock to bring out water, it's as if God is saying to the people, you know, we have to one-up it, right? We know this people, they are not easily impressed. And if the purpose, one of the purposes of trying to engender faith in the people through miracles is to leave a more lasting impression, well, certainly a repetition of a miracle, you know, the people will probably say, okay, no biggie, right? We've seen that one before. So we're going to have to outdo ourselves, God is saying to Moshe and Aharon. And we're going to have the people think that you, Moshe, are going to strike the rock, because even if they weren't there, you know how oral traditions really were just so incredibly accurate often. They probably heard of this time when Moshe took a rock and struck it and water came out. Well, now we have to impress further about what it means to be faithful and to have a leader who keeps faith with God and the people. V'dibartem el hasela. Now talk to the rock. And what happens? Vayikach Moshe et el-mateh. So he takes the staff and he gathers the people. This is a public demonstration of a miracle. Private miracles don't usually count for much in Judaism, right? It's the public nature that is designed to try to inculcate faith. And what does he do? He says, listen, you rebels, Shimu na hamorim. Shall we get water for you out of this rock? And Moshe raised his hand and he struck the rock twice, not once, but twice. And a lot of water came out. Okay, folks. How do you understand Moses's reaction to the people, his uncharacteristic changing of God's direction to him? What is going on within him now? I mean, this was really pretty harsh. Why now? Why now did Moshe, why was he unable to follow a simple speak to the rock? Why did he hit it twice after referring to the Israelites as rebels? Okay, frustrated and overwhelmed. Yeah, it seems like enough was enough. Power display. I'm not sure about the power display. I'd have to, try to see like where would that desire for power that has not been really manifest up until now, where did that show up in the text? He's fed up with it, complaints. Yeah, he does sound angry, doesn't he? Not just frustrated, but he's really angry. Well, yes, when we're in mourning, sometimes we direct our anger at the object closest to us, even though it may not really make any sense, but we know that we're not really angry with, the individual or individuals before us, but they're the target because we're overwhelmed with grief and anger. Good. Angry with God. You know what? This is what I love to teach. Hadn't thought about that. Maybe he's not just angry with the people, but maybe he's angry with God. How could you take my sister? I need her. Aaron's great, but he kind of fumbled it with the golden calf. He's a nice enough guy, but I need a little bit of wisdom from my big sister. Yeah. And anger at the people too for their insensitivity. I mean, can he not have just a little bit space to mourn? These are really thoughtful answers. Oh, I like this. So you're very good. Fear and doubt. Maybe it wouldn't work this time. I mean, maybe Moshe is the doubter now. Maybe it's not the people. Oh, I like this. Maybe it's not the people who don't have faith. Maybe Moshe is the one who doesn't have faith. I mean, Moshe is maybe thinking, okay, I could see some physical act, but can I really expect that verbally I can now bring water out of a rock? Wow. This is really excellent. Yes, and the ambiguity of the Torah, as I mentioned last week, unlike the Odyssey or the Iliad, where you're just drowned in detail, the brilliance of the Torah is that it leaves so much up to the imagination because it's sparse in detail. Okay, let's go back and share again and see what the rabbis say before I give you my opinion. Let's see. Okay, so just go back into share. Yeah, and by the way, I would say, like, the fact that he strikes a rock twice does show whether it's anger or doubt or fear or frustration, but it's like a double measure of. He didn't just strike it once, he struck the rock twice. Now, I'm only going to give you just one approach to understanding why it is that Moshe struck the rock. That again, and it's one that's illustrative of trying to see the Torah as a whole fabric, even though it's far from it. But it was a rabbinic attempt to reconcile sometimes contradictory facts, or to make a more continuous reading possible. So here, one of the classical medieval commentators, Rashi, who draws on usually ancient or typically ancient sources. So when Moses says, Hamin hasela hazeh notzi, when Moses asks to the people, shall we bring water out of this rock? He wasn't doubting. He wasn't being skeptical. He was confused because Miriam died, right? And the well that was appeared in honor of her presence, and there were rocks by the well. When she died, the well disappeared. The rock went back to the other collection of rocks. So they were no longer able to distinguish which rock was the one that was by the well that Moses thought would bring water. They could no longer distinguish it because the well by which there were some rocks disappeared after Miriam's death. And the dialogue that occurred between Moses and the people of Israel, according to this Midrash, is Moses said, shall we bring water out of this rock? When we don't even know which rock it is. And the people then said, we don't care what rock it is. We're thirsty. Figure it out, Moses. So he wasn't really asking, shall we bring forth water out of this rock? Because he doubted. It's because he was confused. He didn't have his big sister to help guide him anymore. And he called them morim, which could mean foolish, but the rabbis make another play, meaning not rebels, because that sounds not respectful. And it doesn't matter if you're a leader, like how badly people behave. You can chide them, you can rebuke them, but you don't get the right to speak disrespectfully to them. So the rabbis translate morim not as rebels, but as morim, as teachers, in a more sarcastic way, meaning you Israelite people, you're going to be our teachers and tell us which rock we should take it from? So there is a clear attempt to minimize, right? To totally reinterpret what happened to Moses, because he wasn't criticizing them, and he got confused, and he wasn't grief, and the people were really just rattling him this time. And why? My question is, why take a text which is pretty straightforward? Moses disobeyed God, struck the rock, not once, but twice when he should have spoken with it, and was punished. And his punishment was severe. So why this attempt to reinterpret? And also, I'd like to hear, does the punishment fit this crime? Moses, who's like leading the people into the land for 40 years, the best he's going to get to do with a special pleading is to look over to the land, but not to lead the people in, because the only sin that is attributed to him for his inability to complete the task is striking the rock instead of speaking to it. How does that sit with you, by the way? Not the right man for the job. Oh, I like this. Esther said, no, no, no. Okay, and that's the way I felt the first time I read this many years ago, and I still have this feeling. Does it feel like a setup, maybe? Okay. God is not forgiving. Oh, you can't learn Torah alone because you miss out on the collective wisdom that people have to offer. So somebody said, this doesn't sound any better than when Miriam was punished and not Aaron over speaking against Moshe. God is maybe not so forgiving. I think it's more complicated than just, it is more complicated than just a scene. But we're going to just stay focused on this scene for the moment, part of a larger plan. So when we feel unjustly wronged, take a look at these brilliant responses which you wrote, both the sentiment and the ideas. I don't know. I think that your comments apply, if we take out the name of Moshe and generalize them, to what is a natural human feeling, right? We've been wronged. It's unjust. We try to make sense of it. We can't make sense of it. Somehow, whatever we've done, most of the time isn't so horrible that sometimes a cruel fate that can be our lot seems to be commensurate with whatever we may have done. So it just feels really human to me. And we know that Moshe is so troubled later on because he pleads one more time with God. You've forgiven so many other people, God. Will you not forgive me? And not only does God refuse, but he tells Moshe later on, don't bring it up again either. I mean, this was a really harsh punishment. It feels unfair to me, as it does to many of you as well. So I think that we can make sense on a human level about his not being the right person for the job. Maybe he was tired. I love the answer that somebody gave where Moshe didn't want to admit that he was finished himself, that he was tired, that he was done. And so God didn't set him up. Moshe set himself up because he knew as a leader, you cannot speak to people in a way that is so disrespectful. Even if they deserve it, when you're the leader, you don't have that privilege. So motivation are complicated. Sometimes we ourselves don't understand our own motivation for why we do things. And this to me just makes the text richer, because it can make us really think about, our ancestors as not being some abstract theoretical people, but they had the same issues that we did, whether it's the trio that we see with Aaron and Miriam and Moses, or whether it's the rabbis interpreting their stories with them. So we don't know, but our motivations can be hidden from us. Even when we feel our punishment is unjust, we may not understand why something happened. We may not understand our reaction to it fully, but sometimes it's not the kind of thing you think about. It just is a state of emotional response that is immediate and visceral. Why the punishment? Again, I don't think that we can definitively answer that. I can give you a few other quick interpretations. One, again, leadership is about faith in the Tanakh, in the Bible. When Moses cast doubt on God's word, according to some commentators, which he does when he says, listen up, you rebels. Can we bring water out of this rock? Really? Well, the one thing you can't do if you're leading the Jewish people is to demonstrate a lack of public faith. Moshe doubts God privately at times, but you can't do it publicly. It may be that the punishment is that I kind of think that Moshe is not the right person to lead the people in. Very often, the people who are the ones, I want to think of a better analogy, but one is not coming to me at the time. Lahavdil, as we say, not that these two are comparable, but Mikhail Gorbachev was the one to dismantle the communist state of the former Soviet Union. He was not the one to be able to bring democracy to the people. That would take someone else. And by the way, that really is a bad analogy, because I'm not out so well anyway. But the people who are the change makers, the revolutionaries, are usually not the best ones to kind of solidify and to stabilize the gains that are made. People who are great at startups are not usually the best CEOs, which is why a CEO is often brought in after an initial startup phase is made. I don't think that Moshe was really the right person. Also, would you want a 120-year-old waging war on your behalf? I mean, Social Security sounds a little bit nicer. There's a time and a place, and that's sort of my reading of it. But again, I wouldn't say it's one factor. It's whoever said it's complicated. I would say it's multifaceted. It's rich, just like the texture of our lives. Now, I want to take a look at the clock and just see how we are doing. I'd like to do a brief check-in for questions that some of you may not have asked. The more people who speak, the better it is. So let's do a quick check-in before we move on. I'm never that clear, so don't hesitate to ask if you have a comment or a question. Okay. You can always ask. I'll leave another minute or two at the end. And I'd like to go back and let's take a look at another text. And again, we're dealing with the theme of transition. We're watching one generation turn over to another generation the reins of leadership, of decision making, and of the future. And again, the overall theme of transition is really a life theme. That if we live long enough, we've all experienced transitions. Some are very painful, some are smooth. Even the ones that go relatively easily always involve letting go. Even the ones that we want to happen cause some inner grief and turmoil, because it's just the nature of a transition. Even in situations where transitions were ones that people want desperately, or where people desire desperately, may be too strong. Usually not everything about the past that you're letting go of was so completely horrible, in most cases, that there wasn't some good in it. So that's why all transitions, even the ones that we ask for and desire, involve some amount of grieving. And especially really good transitions. And I don't know if you were to interview Moshe and to ask him, so tell me, what did it feel like when you had to retire? Well, I'm not sure what Moses would say. Right? He would probably say, you know, it's a mixed bag. Sometimes the complaining was really difficult, but I got to be the instrument through which I liberated my people, had a close relationship with God, where we were, you know, senior partner, junior partner, that intimacy of having the divine in my life was something that was just incredible and so overwhelming. I think it would be mixed. And that's just kind of life. So to me, these transitions are really fascinating as I reflect on my own life and the life of people who are close to me. It gives me a wider context and the ability to say, some are good, some are very difficult. The majority have encompassed a spectrum of emotions and experiences. In the remaining couple of minutes, I'm going to have to summarize, because this is such an exquisite midrash on Aaron's death, a part of the transmission, the transition. Sorry, I'm actually having a car problem, which I think is why I had that wonderful Freudian slip. Not transmission, transition. Miriam died suddenly. We don't know why. Aaron, and it was clear his time had come too, and he's punished. By the way, poor Aaron. I mean, he gets punished when Miriam speaks up. He gets punished when Moses strikes the rock. Right? He's very passive. He just happens to be like caught at the wrong time with the wrong person, but he's equally punished. And it has to do with that public declaration of faith that his younger brother didn't make. I don't know, could Aaron have corrected Moses's words, and that's why he's punished? Not clear. Can you imagine what it's like to be told, and in this case it was by God, but think about this yourself. If somebody told you the exact moment when you were going to die, right? You knew that you were going to go up this mountain, which is what we see in Numbers 20, 23 through 29, where God says to Aaron and to Moses, Aaron is going to be gathered to his people. And by the way, this is a biblical phrase, which again, it's just so beautiful. It doesn't say, sometimes it says die, but gathered to his people. I mean, it's as if the Bible is saying when we die, yes, we're not here, but a part of us is gathered in to all of us. I find this to be extremely meaningful. But Moses, Aaron's son Eleazar are all commanded to go up to Mount Hor, to Hor Hahar, and Aaron will then be stripped of his garments. The garments will be placed on Eleazar, and Aaron, when he takes those garments off, will die. Who is more anguished? Is it Moses, who has to remove the garments, the priestly garments of his brother? Is it Aaron, who knows that as each part of his priestly uniform comes off, he is that much closer to death? It's not painful, right? That is physically painful, but could you imagine that feeling of what it's like when that last remaining garment was on? Or is it Aaron's son who has to witness his father's death? Very, very hard to comprehend what this must have been like for all involved, as well as for the people who were accustomed to seeing Aaron, and suddenly it's like he goes up in his priestly garments, but somebody else is wearing the same clothes when he comes down. Wow. So, Aaron, Aharon then, is consoled by Moses according to rabbinic teaching. And he's told, look, Aharon, I know this is incredibly painful and difficult, but maybe you can take some comfort in knowing that your children, your child, will continue in the family business directly, because by God's command, it's the family of Aaron that carries out the priestly duties. Sometimes it's hard to remember the names of the sons of Moses because they kind of disappear from history. Leadership passes over from them to his biological descendants to Joshua. And here, if you'll take a look when we're finished, after class is a little optional reading. Even if you don't understand all of it, this Rashi on Numbers 20:26, you'll see how gentle Moses is as he tries to explain gently to Aaron that he's going to die. How difficult of an act it is for one sibling to say to another, to deliver the news, as sometimes we're the ones who have to do today. I mean, you could feel just the agony that Moshe experiences in having to bring this news, and how painful it must be for Moshe, right? His sister has just died, and now his brother is about to die as well. And we'll end, because it's always good to end on a positive note. The rabbis tell us that we always end with divrei tanchumim, words of consolation. Again, acute readers of the texts that the rabbis are, when Aaron dies, it says, Kol Beit Yisrael, that every Israelite wept and mourned Aaron's death. It doesn't say that about Moses. So the rabbis ask, what does it mean that all Israelites And what they say is both the men and the women, everyone, because Aaron is known in our tradition as an Ohev Shalom v'Rodef Shalom. He's someone who is known, he's a model of a peacenik, right? Someone who loves peace, loved peace, and actively promoted it. It's not just he had a passive love, he actively promoted peace. And there are many stories, midrashim, which describe how Aaron, when he saw two people fighting, would go to one aggrieved party and say, you know, Joe is so upset with himself. He's sorry that he hurt you, and he just feels terribly. And then he'd go to the other person, and we'll call this person's name Sam, and he would go to Sam and say, or to Joe rather, and say, Sam, it feels so badly about what he did to you. He hurt you. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to apologize. Then Joe and Sam would meet each other, and they would fall into one another's arms, weeping with forgiveness, because Aharon is known as a symbol, a pursuer of peace, someone who didn't wait for peace to happen, but who tried to make peace happen between individuals, between spouses. So I am 1 minute over. I want to thank all of you for being here again today. Honestly, I have learned so much. Julie, would you be good enough to send me the transcript of the chat box?
Of course.
You're terrific, and thank you so much for sharing your insights and for being such a wonderful class and giving me a good way to end the day today.